Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global show around COVID-19. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to convene this daily conversation. As you can see on the screen, it's episode 152. We've been on the air for 152 straight days, including weekends, vacations, holidays, every single day to cover the crisis in all its forms. One of the things we cover is creativity and developments in publishing and new information. And today we're going to be talking about marijuana's new image. And to talk about this, we are meeting with Heather Cabot. She's at Cabot Ventures. Please follow her. She's the author of the brand new book. How brand new? It's launching tomorrow. The New Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream. She's also my Columbia Journalism School classmate. We may or may not reveal how many years exactly it has been. The years have been much kinder to Heather Cabot than they have to me. Her new book comes out tomorrow, and you'll meet her in just a couple of minutes. Please tell us where you're watching from right now, and we're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So first, let me come on screen and say hello to all of you. Hi, folks. Thank you for being here. I'm Sree Sreenivasan. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting business. Our motto, don't cancel your event without talking to us. Don't even plan your virtual event without talking to us first. My email address is right there, sree@sree.net. We'd love to talk to you. We love geeking out on virtual events. We've done events for 50 people and for 100,000 people. Your event, I bet, is somewhere in between, and we'd love to talk to you about it. Let's tell you a little bit about this show. Many of you are new to this. In the first 140 episodes, we had 1 million plus viewers, 100 million social impressions, 260 guests, 148 of them women, speakers from 53 cities, 15 countries, even the chief scientist of WHO. We're able to do this because of our awesome producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. We're also able to do this because of Scroll.in. Please check out their website, Scroll.in. We are very grateful to them. And all our archives are on YouTube, youtube.com/SreeNet. Please subscribe. Please check out all the wonderful conversations we've had. We've laughed, we've cried, we've learned together. And that's the purpose of all of us being here. We want to start by thanking our sponsors who make all of this possible. First, Muckrack Academy and Fundamentals of Social Media for journalists, PR pros, and everyone. Free certification now available. More than 4,000 people have taken this course, mrac.co/social. Just take a photograph if you'd like to learn more about this, or a screenshot, or write to me, mrac.co/social, and we'd love to have you take this class. We are also grateful to our friends at Nunbelievable, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each handcrafted cookie provides a meal to those in need. One cookie equals one meal. 20% off the code SREE, SREE. We're very grateful to them. And we're also grateful to the promotional consideration provided by
Hotstar Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbusters streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
Rave reviews for the caper comedy Loot Case, now streaming on Hotstar. Use the code SREE2020 to get a $3.75 subscription a month for hotstar.com/US. And our final promotion today is for a workshop for nonprofits. We're teaching this next Wednesday, not this Wednesday, August 19th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We have a fabulous collection of speakers, all-stars. Beatrice Frey, who's the head of digital communications at UN Peacekeeping, Tik Milan, who is a former media strategist at GLAAD, and Dante Licona, senior social media officer at the International Federations of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, and former social media officer of the WHO, the World Health Organization. They will be teaching us how nonprofits and social media can cope when the world is on fire. Please check out how to buy tickets. They're $20 to $30, bit.ly/NP Workshop 2020, bit.ly/NP Workshop 2020. And if anyone can't afford a ticket, given the circumstances today, email me and we'll find a way to get you in. bit.ly/NP Workshop 2020. You're going to get amazing tips. I can't wait to learn from all of them. Now, are you ready for Heather Cabot? I am. Her book, launching tomorrow, The New Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream. She is a former journalist, or a writer still, of course, and a former classmate of mine is what I wanted to say at Columbia Journalism School. So without further ado, let me bring on stage to say hello to all of you, Heather Cabot. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Sree. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here, and thank you for being with us. Tell us, my first question to everybody is, how are you doing, and how's your family surviving the pandemic? I also know we were supposed to do this last week, but you had power outage in where you are. So talk about that a little bit too.
Yes, please. Yes. We in suburban Westchester, just outside New York City, we unfortunately had the tropical storm move through last week. And actually many of my neighbors are still without power. So we're fortunate that we got the power back. And, honestly, so far we're doing okay. Everybody is healthy. Sree, as you know, Sree may mention later, but I'm actually married to one of our J School classmates, and Neeraj Kamlani, and we've been weathering COVID, like everybody else. We've been really fortunate that everyone's been healthy. Our two teenagers are healthy. We're just, hoping for the best for everybody, and that we all get through this safely. How about you?
Thank you. Thanks for asking. I've done 250 plus of these interviews, and very rarely do people ask it back on camera. So I'm always surprised when they do. Thank you. Thank you for asking. We are locking down 2 17-year-olds. Nothing worse apart from getting the pandemic, getting sick yourself, turning 17 with your parents. We have twins also, as you know, and we are just blessed that our immediate family is okay, but we have lost friends who have had COVID, and we have other friends who recovered from COVID. It's a very sad time, and everything feels so much worse because the way we see that the great sacrifices we made here in the Northeast seem to have been wasted because most of the rest of the country did not follow suit, and it's just very hard to kind of understand. And so let's talk a little bit about your book. And among the things that has happened to the pandemic is that authors who had book launches and book tours planned and everything have had to turn all virtual. So let's talk about that aspect of it first. What's it like to try to launch a book in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, it's gone through phases. I think we didn't quite know exactly what it was going to look like. And I originally thought, because my on sale date is now, that we might be past things. But of course, the lockdowns continue, and the book tours are not happening except in this way. And I will say, and I always look for silver linings. Sure, you know that about me. I'm an optimist. The one great thing about this happening now is the fact that I don't have to travel to interact with readers, and I can do a lot of this work from home. And when I launched my last book, I was traveling a lot. I traveled all over the country to do various speaking events, and do book talks at bookstores and go to conferences, and which I love. And I'm a people person, and I love being able to connect with people in person. But I do have, as I said earlier, 2 teenagers at home, and my family is here, and it's kind of nice to be able to set up shop and have a TV studio here in my house, and be able to go all over the country and hopefully all over the world to be able to talk about the book and all the research. And frankly, a lot of the research for the book was on the road. So my family really endured me being away for long stretches on the West Coast, primarily, and Canada, while I was researching the book, because so much of what I had to do was on the ground reporting in person and shadowing the main characters in the book who I profiled. I needed to be with them. So, that took a lot of time away from my family. So the silver lining is I get to be home to promote the book. And the other thing I'll say is I think people are being really creative, and I think people recognize that authors, are looking at different ways for us to share our work. And so I've been amazed at all of the different interesting collaborations and partnerships that are starting to pop up, and fun things that I didn't expect. So I'm really grateful for those opportunities.
And there's so much going on. It's also hard to kind of break through the clutter, but you have a book that will get a lot of attention, partly because of the topic, partly because it got a rave review already that you've been telling us about from Good Morning America. Tell us about that.
Oh, so the book was chosen as an August must-read, and the contributor for Good Morning America who actually selected my book is a woman named Zibby Owens, who's the host of the award-winning podcast Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And as it turns out, Zibby is actually going to be interviewing me on Thursday evening at an event we're doing with the Strand Bookstore, which is at 7 o'clock Eastern time on Thursday. And so she's going to be interviewing me for that event, and also we'll be repurposing that for her podcast as well. I'm really excited. And that was one of those situations where, just to give a little inside baseball of the publishing world, typically when you promote a book, they send out galley proofs months in advance. And because of COVID and the warehouse being shut down, we didn't have physical galleys of my book. So we were sort of relegated to just, sending out digital copies. And, for people out there who are readers, it's kind of nice to, especially if you're reviewing a book, to actually have a book in your hand that you can underline and, turn the pages down and all of that. And so with Zibby, I really, really wanted to do, I knew I wanted to do her podcast because I was really writing for Chardonnay Moms. My book is called The New Chardonnay, and I really wanted to meet her. So I reached out to her, and she was so wonderful, and invited me to come out and meet her. And I actually hand delivered a copy of, I went to Staples and printed up a copy of the galley, and I brought it to her. And we ended up hitting it off, and she read it in time for her August selections for Good Morning America. And I'm just so grateful to her. So it was wonderful and so flattering. And there are some other, we got some nice early reviews also from the trade press as well, from Publishers Weekly and also from Booklist. And then of course, for folks, when you actually see the book, we have some wonderful endorsements from role models, a personal role model of mine, Katie Couric, who was just so generous in reading an early draft of the manuscript. And her blurb is actually on the cover of the book. And as you know, Sree, and I don't know if your audience knows, but I was a long-time TV news broadcaster myself, and always admired Katie Couric. So to have her endorsement on the book was just a dream come true.
And she is one of many all-stars that have reviewed the book and have commented here. So I'm just going to pull out Katie's comment here. It says, no matter where you stand on legalization, Heather Cabot's deep reporting, unforgettable cast of characters, and great storytelling gives readers the inside scoop on how marijuana landed on Main Street and why it's coming soon to a city near you. Award-winning journalist and New York Times best-selling author, Katie Couric. And that's one of the points that you wanted to make when I was telling you that we've gotten questions about this topic and about the book, and you right away, you can tell everyone what you told me.
Oh, well, so the book this is not an advocacy book in any way, shape, or form. It is a work of journalism. I really went into this topic, and I'm happy to explain kind of the genesis of it if you want. But I went in as a person who really knew nothing about cannabis subculture at all. I didn't know really much at all about the legalization movement. I didn't know anything about medical cannabis. I really had no background at all. And as I tell people, and I wrote in the book in the introduction, I grew up in the 80s as part of the Just Say No generation, and I'm a suburban mom of teens. And so my interaction with marijuana was really very limited. And I really got into this because I started noticing around me that it seemed to be becoming more normalized. And I was seeing things like Oprah Magazine, doing a story about a tea party where the women were wearing, fancy hats and gloves and having this THC infused tea. I saw Martha Stewart on a TV talk show with Snoop Dogg, that was a pot themed television show on prime time on VH1. I mean, I saw all the things that you're seeing. And I thought, this is really strange. Well, how is this happening? And at the same time, my first book, I had spent a number of time profiling female investors who were backing women-led tech startups. So my first book, Geek Girl Rising: Inside the Sisterhood Shaking Up Tech, was about the women who were agitating for change in Silicon Valley and trying to get women and underrepresented founders in general and computer scientists a seat at the table in the innovation economy. And in that book, there's a chapter specifically about feminist financiers. And some of those women, I noticed right around the spring of 2017, I noticed that some of them were starting to make angel investments in cannabis startups. And I just thought it was so strange. It was completely out of left field for me. And especially because I felt like these people were they all had, Wall Street credentials. They were very straight-laced in my eyes. And I thought, why would any of these people be getting involved with something federally illegal? I thought it was fascinating. And so, of course, I started making phone calls. I started chatting with some of these women. And as the story goes, one of them said to me, I can't explain this entire industry to you in a phone call. If you really want to understand what's happening, you have to go to the Marijuana Business Convention in Las Vegas. And you have to actually go and meet the entrepreneurs, meet the investors, walk the expo floor at the Las Vegas Convention Center, and see for yourself how big and how professional this industry is, and that it really has come out of the shadows. And that's what I did. And that one trip ended up inspiring the book proposal, because it was really this Alice in Wonderland moment for me. I had no idea how big the industry had become and was about to become. And so that inspired the book.
That's a great way for us to kind of get into the book and the story of it. And everyone who's joined us right now, we're talking to Heather Cabot, the author of The New Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream. And that's a really important point for people like me who are turning 50 this year. We grew up at a time. Okay, I didn't want to say us.
It's okay. It's all right. I'm owning it.
Well, first of all, let me just put a two-shot of us here and ask anybody if they would think we're the same age. It would not make any sense.
Oh, come on.
But I would just say that one of the things that we've been surprised by, that that what you said, the just say no, and we could never have imagined where it's become legal, not just in parts of America, but in some parts of the world. So why don't you start, if you could, by laying out where it is legal, where it's not, and despite everything, it's still federally illegal. And
exactly.
That's a point. So walk us through the journey of, I mean, obviously we want people to buy the book, but let's hear some of the milestone moments, and who are the people, who are the heroes and the villains in your book. You don't take sides, obviously, but who are the people who made this moment possible, and who are the people who, if they came, suddenly showed up here from the 60s, would be shocked about that all of this happened, and how did any of this become acceptable in any shape or fashion in America? So I'll let you take your time.
Wow.
And then
those are some big questions.
Yeah, of course. And then what we're going to do is what I call my global tour. We're going to have people tell us where they're watching from. So folks, tell us. And Heather's well-traveled, so there's a good chance she's been where you're watching from. But over to Heather.
Thank you. Okay. Well, so first of all, I just want to say that although this book does go into the history, and I explain some of the science, and I really go into this is very much a business book. I really wanted to write a narrative in the true sense. My challenge to myself was I wanted to write a really entertaining, fun book to read. And I was inspired to do that because of the people that I met. And it literally, you'll see when you read the book, so many of the scenes in the book fall into the category, you could not make this up. I mean, because especially because so many of us go into this topic, myself included, with a lot of preconceptions about what we think this industry is going to be and the people we're going to meet and the situations we're going to get ourselves into. And so literally there were so many times that I was wrong, that I thought for just even the convention I was mentioning before. I mean, I had been to CES when I was covering tech, and I didn't think that this would be like that. I thought I was going to walk in and everyone was going to be in tie-dye and they were going to be, stoned out of their minds. And I didn't know I didn't know. In fact, my parents were worried about me even going to the convention, and they were like, "Are you sure, you want to go?" But I get there, and it's like every other business tech type of conference I've ever been to. It was people in sweater vests and with their laptops and their lanyards and their swag bags. And I mean, even the expo floor, it looked like every other trade show that I'd ever been to. And so my point in all of this is that I kept having those types of situations where I would think I would know what I was walking into, and it's completely different. And of course, that made for really, really, really rich material. So my challenge was to, number one, dissect this very, very complicated, nuanced topic that covers everything from, politics to business to science to health and medicine to the environment to, social justice. It hits on so many things I'm interested in. So I had to sort of figure out, how do I unspool that and touch on all of these things, and also the history of marijuana prohibition in this country, and at the same time find great characters through which I can tell these stories, and also hopefully educate the audience a little bit on all of these things. So the book centers around 4 main characters, and I don't want to give too much away, but I'll tell you just a thumbnail sketch of each of them. So the book really takes place between the years of 2012 and the present. I finished writing just at the end of 2019, and it takes you through this journey from the moment that they each had their aha moments, which was right after Colorado and Washington voted to legalize recreational use of cannabis, meaning that adults over 21 would be able to purchase it. And sort of that green rush that happened as soon as those votes took place. And so these 4 entrepreneurs are people who, for various reasons, decided they wanted to get in on this, despite the fact that it was federally illegal, despite the fact that there were all kinds of risks, personal, professional, reputational. For various reasons, they each had a passion for getting into this. So the first character is a woman named Beth Stovola, who is a mom of 6 from the Jersey Shore. She worked on Wall Street for a number of years, and she decides to get into the nascent medical cannabis market in Arizona. And we follow her story. And I don't want to give too much away about Beth, but one of the things that really struck me about her, which again, as an outsider coming into this industry, I was fascinated by this idea of, if you're somebody who comes from the outside, and she came from finance, she came from Wall Street, she didn't know anything about cannabis. She didn't know anything about growing it, she didn't use it, nothing like that. How do you sort of figure out, if you're coming into this industry, how do you figure out where you get your experts from? And of course, because this was an industry coming out of the shadows, it was, previously criminal, she had to sort of figure out, like, who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. And that's a big part of her story. And that was the story for a lot of these early pioneers who initially came in with money, but didn't really understand. They didn't understand they didn't understand the business. They didn't understand the agricultural aspects. They didn't understand the cultural aspects. They didn't understand really much about it at all. They also didn't understand the threat of the illegal market, which wasn't going to go away just because localities made it, commercialized it and regulated it. So through Beth's story, we sort of find out about some of these crazy, unsavory characters that she has to deal with, and how she has to figure out how to make her way without losing all the money that she's invested, and also keep herself and her family and her employees safe from some of these folks. So I want to set up her story a little bit there. So that's Beth. Then there's Bruce Linton, who is the founder of a company I'm sure that many of your viewers will know. It's called Canopy Growth. It's in Canada. It was founded in rural Ontario. Bruce is also an unusual guy, and he came from tech and became one of the first licensed producers. The company was originally called Tweed when they got their license, but they became one of the first licensed producers of Canada and ultimately became one of the biggest legal cannabis companies in the world. And there's just a great story about, why he did that. I don't want to give too much away about Bruce, but the other thing about him that's really fascinating is he had this big idea to create the cannabis beverage of the future, which is another reason why the book is called The New Chardonnay. There are a lot of themes in the book around alcohol, and the idea of sort of the new Chardonnay kind of comes from one of the themes in the book were these pioneers who were trying to figure out how to create an elevated experience, if you will, that mainstream people would maybe trade their alcohol for, maybe would consider a THC infused drink over a glass of wine. And so that's a big part of his story. And you'll find out that Canopy becomes one of the very first, it is the first company that gets a major investment from big alcohol. And so you find out what happens. The third character is a guy named Ted Chung, who is Snoop Dogg's business partner and his manager. And many people, of course, know that Snoop is synonymous with marijuana and smoking marijuana. But what they don't know is that Snoop and Ted actually founded one of the very first venture capital firms to invest not necessarily in sort of the growing and selling of the actual commodity, but they actually are one of the first funds to think about the ancillary businesses. So the picks and shovels of the industry, the software, the technology, the lab equipment, testing and tracing, all the kinds of things that underpin this entire industry, which is a highly regulated industry. And so, so we kind of take you through their journey and how they figure out how to invest in the business, how to create brands around Snoop, and ultimately, tell the backstory of how he ended up partnering with Martha Stewart on their television show. And with their overall goal was normalization. And they were coming at it very much from a social justice point of view. And one of the major themes of the book also, and it's one that I, again, coming in as a just say no generation person, someone my age and someone who was not really involved in any of that culture, I really didn't understand the connection between mass incarceration and the war on drugs. And I didn't understand how so much of what we're seeing today was tied into communities of color being disproportionately policed for marijuana possession, and really how it ruined lives, and how, as you see the industry evolving, if you pay attention to it, you'll see that in all of these states, as they legalize, they're trying to figure out how to deal with that, how to, address restorative justice, how to make sure that, as you have these major corporations that are cashing in and that are worth billions of dollars, that zip codes that were disproportionately policed and in many ways were really damaged by the war on marijuana, how they aren't left behind from those opportunities. And I that was a part of the story I really wanted to tell. It was something that I was able to address through Snoop and Ted to some extent. And also, in a chapter where I sort of go into some of the history of what happened in Colorado. So that's Snoop and Ted. And then the last character is a guy named Jeff Danzer, who some people know him as Jeff, the 420 chef. And Jeff is a cannabis chef. And what I like about Jeff, and I always say this about him, is not only is he like this mad scientist, like crazy inventor, but he is really the everyman. So one of the things that you'll learn about in the book is that most of the people that were really cashing in on this industry, for the most part, they are wealthy white men. They are people who, because it's federally legal, they were able to apply for these very lucrative licenses in these various states. Because they either were independently wealthy or they had a very strong network. And what I liked about Jeff is that he sort of saw this opportunity, but he didn't really come from all that. And he really made his way because of his own ingenuity and his own creativity. And so you learn through Jeff about edibles, you learn about sort of some of the science of cannabis, and also some of the future of the, what may be one day where in the post-COVID world, there may be a time where people are actually consuming cannabis as they would alcohol in a bar. And in fact, pre-COVID, I don't want to give away too much of the book, but there were parts of the country that were considering what are called consumption lounges, which were social venues where people could go and be able to order various infused products and be able to enjoy that out in the open in a public space. And that was really something people were looking forward to. I don't know how that's going to shake out in the post-COVID world. But that was one of the things that I was interested in showing with Jeff. And the other thing that Jeff also shows too is this whole kind of gourmet aspect of cannabis infused food. And through his chapter, I take you into Sonoma and into Northern California, where all of these folks who are involved in the wine industry are trying to create artisanal experiences. And a craft cannabis kind of movement, which I thought was, again, as a total outsider, I thought that was interesting.
Sure. So thank you for giving us so much information. I want to, before we go into looking at who's watching and viewing with us, I do want to ask you about that racial justice aspect of it. Where is it now? Are people of color getting a shot at owning some of these companies if they're not named Snoop Dogg? Are there opportunities? What is the situation right now? And our friend Jonathan Borstein says back in the 60s and 70s, the racist element of drug enforcement was well known.
Yeah, I mean, well, I was a kid back then, and I think as we got certainly into the late 80s and the 90s, I think it was less. It was happening, but I just don't think that there was a consciousness about it. And I think it's one of the things that certainly with like my kids, and I'm talking to my kids about all of these things right now as it pertains to Black Lives Matter. And I think that there's absolutely a connection there. And I think it's important that people understand that, as we look ahead to how we're going to make changes to systemic racism in our country, that we also figure out a way to deal with cannabis reform. So I think I think that is something that we will continue to reckon with. So to your question, I think one thing people have to understand, because it's still federally legal, is that this is an incredibly fragmented market. So every single state that has legalized, whether it's for medical marijuana or for adult use, and I should go back and say that 33 states allow some form of cannabis, 11 states allow for adult use, and there are a number of states that have it on the ballot, have recreational use on the ballot this fall. Arizona is one of those states, New Jersey, I believe Montana. So even with COVID, even with concerns about the election, some of these campaigns are continuing. And I do think, public opinion is certainly at a place now in this country. It's the highest ever. More than 2/3 of Americans say that they are in favor of legalization. But that said, it is a very, very complicated topic. And one of the reasons why it is so thorny is how states address things like not only restorative justice, not only making sure that underrepresented founders have priority when they apply for licenses, but expungement. So if you can imagine this, Colorado, until this summer, did not have a program in place where if you were convicted of a low-level marijuana offense, there was not really an expungement program in place. And what happened in July is the legislature finally passed a bill that gave the governor the privilege now to pardon all of those people. But if you can think about this, there were all these entrepreneurs that were cashing in, making lots of money, and there were still people that had convictions on their records that were preventing them from getting jobs, from getting housing, from moving on with their lives. And so every state is kind of figuring out how to deal with this. If you follow what was happening in New York last year and also New Jersey, these issues slowed things down because they have to be approached with a lot of thought, and there are a lot of stakeholders. And so I would say, if you live in New York or New Jersey, or any of the places that are, Arizona, if they end up passing it, that's something to really pay attention to, is How are they dealing with expungement? How are they dealing with supporting minority entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, veterans, LGBTQ? You know, how is the state ranking those applications? What kinds of resources are put in place so that they have a chance to compete against these big corporations? Illinois is one of the places that passed an adult use program through its legislature, and they included some social justice, actually a lot of social equity provisions in that legislation, and I think everyone's kind of watching to see how that plays out as that market gets underway. So I think the good thing is about all of this is that people are talking about it. I was really heartened during the Democratic debates to see that it was actually being talked about on the debate stage. I thought that was a real moment that, you know, wasn't just talking about like this as a moral issue in terms of like, you know, I think we're past this whole question of like, you know, is it a gateway drug? You know, that's been debunked. I think the question now is, okay, a majority of Americans feel like they're okay with it, but how do you make sure that you deal with some of these other issues around criminal justice reform? How do you make it equitable? How do you make sure that, as you know, this is a massive industry. How do you make sure it doesn't turn into big tobacco? How do you make sure that consumers are safe? I mean, there's all these other things, and this issue around social justice, I think, is really, it's exciting that people are talking about it in prime time, and we'll have to see what happens with the presidential election too.
I think President Trump is notoriously or well known to be a non-drinker, right? And is not, I presume, has never talked about marijuana. What do we know about Joe Biden? As what is his stance on it?
Well, two things. So Trump, the interesting thing about Trump is that the one comment that I believe he has made in the last couple of years about this is he was supportive of states' rights. And I think that is kind of an interesting way to kind of have it both ways. And, you know, if the states are passing their own programs to allow them to just do what they're going to do. It was at one point when Senator Cory Gardner from Colorado had a piece of legislation that looked like, you know, this was like in spring of 2018, and that was like one of the only, and that interestingly enough, so Trump made this comment about being in support of the States Act, and it was right around the time that former Speaker of the House John Boehner, who is a notorious marijuana foe, ended up joining the board of one of the biggest multi-state marijuana operators in the country. It was right around the same time. It was like within a week. So that was kind of interesting. In terms of the Biden campaign, that has been really fascinating to watch because, as you remember, you know, Bernie Sanders came out. I want to say it was in the spring, and basically said that, you know, on day one he would legalize cannabis. And Biden has made some, you know, in terms of from a progressive point of view, he has not been in sync with the progressive wing of the party on this. He's come out for decriminalization, but he has not. And even a couple of weeks ago, when the party put out their platform, it's still not spelling out, you know, legalization. And so, and people, you know, advocacy organizations like the Marijuana Policy Project, NORML, those organizations, you know, they feel like it's not going far enough. They want to see it completely legalized. They want to see it, you know, regulated. And it's very complicated. So you know, we could spend a lot of time talking about decriminalization versus legalization. But I think at the end of the day, the point is, even if Biden, you know, if there is a Biden administration, it's not necessarily a done deal unless we have a Democratic Senate, that there's going to be a lot, like a huge change. And I think everyone's kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. But again, the states are still moving forward. The last thing I'll just say on this point, one of the biggest things to watch if you're interested in this topic is what happens with banking. And so right now, many people may not realize this, but these cannabis businesses, even if they're legal in a state, a lot of banks won't do business with them. So these businesses are dealing in cash, which makes it, you know, it certainly invites crime. So it can make it very unsafe for the people working in these businesses. But in addition, to get back to your question about minority entrepreneurs, because it is federally illegal and because banks, financial institutions do not deal with these businesses, well, you can't get a loan. So again, these folks that don't necessarily have hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars to get into the cultivation or the manufacturing aspects of this business, which are very capital intensive businesses to begin with. I mean, just to apply for a license, you could be talking about $1 million. So if you don't have access to any kind of financing, it really kind of cuts most people out. And so that, I think, it'll be very interesting to see if that is addressed. The House did pass a measure called the Safe Banking Act. It was sort of stalled in the Senate, and when both chambers were going over the stimulus package that's been held up in limbo, some of those provisions actually are in there. I don't know what horse trading is going to happen, and Mitch McConnell actually did talk about it. It's actually several Republicans talked about the fact that they didn't think cannabis should be part of this package at all. But I think the Democrats were saying, but these businesses, a lot of them were declared essential businesses during COVID, and so these are businesses that are operating during lockdown, but they're not eligible for any federal aid at all there because they're federally illegal. So it's just interesting, this conundrum between, if you're somebody who's interested in states' rights and, understanding federalism and all this stuff, it's a kind of a fascinating case study to see how these different businesses have maneuvered in this environment where there's this conflict between Washington and the rest of the country.
And just to hear that it costs, you need $1 million for a license in some states tells you that the fix is already in the kind of people who can afford that. This is not, you can start small businesses with a lot less money than that. But if you want to start a cannabis business, this is what it costs. So I'm already learning a lot, and I know people are too. Let's go through some of the comments. Jonathan Borstein is watching from the East Village, and Jonathan just tweeted out that the Nutella Cafe, which is my form of recreational drug, is Nutella is now available and the store is open. So I'm excited to hear about that. The cafe did not close because of the pandemic. So Jonathan and I have a date that we have planned, and Jonathan's watched 152 straight episodes of this show. So it's incredible.
That's so nice.
Joe Alpio is watching. Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for your support.
Hi. Yeah. How are you?
You know Joe, right? From ABC. Yeah.
ABC. Hi. Good to see you.
Rajni's watching from Toronto. What's the story in Toronto in Canada in connection with the new Chardonnay?
Well, I mean, there's a big part of the book that takes place in Canada. Canada is an interesting place because it was the first G7 nation to legalize across all of its provinces, and people were expecting big things from Canada. And, the revenues really haven't been what they thought they were going to be, mostly because one of the big reasons was because the illicit market was so mature there. And, I think they really underestimated how much people were going to continue to buy from the unregulated market. And I think some of the licensed producers they didn't have the same type of products, the same quality initially. And so they made some missteps. And then the other problem is that, the Canadian government was very slow and very methodical as it should have been, but to figure out distribution. So, for example, initially, there were very few products that were allowed. And then, over the course of the years, they started to allow extracts, which ultimately allowed for things like edibles and beverages. Well, the illicit market already had all those things. So it's a complicated place. But it's a case study for other parts of the world to kind of look at how the industry has evolved there, there's been quite a correction in terms of the publicly traded companies there too. I think they were highly overvalued. But now people are figuring out the fundamentals and figuring out what the demand actually is, and then the provinces are also figuring out the retail situation as well. You have to have distribution, which is also another problem in California. You can legalize it, But if you don't have a place to buy it that's convenient, then that kind of defeats the purpose. You have to sort of figure that out as well. And each province in Canada had their own rules about how they were going to allow retail shops to open legally. So anyway, Canada is definitely a fascinating place.
Doug Levy's watching from San Rafael, California. Anand's watching from Andhra Pradesh, India. Have you been to India? Remind me.
Many times.
Yes, you have. So
many times.
What are your favorite memories of India?
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, a lot. Let me think about this. We've taken the kids. I've been three times. Our kids have been twice. But every time we go, it's mostly to see family. We don't do a ton of sightseeing. I mean, we were mostly in Mumbai and in Pune, where my in-laws were living. I think just being there and experiencing the markets and the temples, and just because we have family that actually reside there, we got a chance to actually. We didn't really do the touristy things, if you will. We got a chance to actually see what it was really like for a certain subset of people to live there. And I would say the one thing that I always found so overwhelming about, being there is, you're sort of with family, like in compounds, in this one world, but then you walk outside and it's the shanties, and it's the, the cows and the camels and the traffic, and nobody following the traffic lights, and a whole family's on motorcycles, and like the whole just life just happening all around you. And I found it fascinating, but I think it was a very different experience going because we had family there versus just going as a tourist. So
sure. Let's see here. Ritu is watching from California. Apollo's watching from Vegas before I decamp to New Jersey. So he's coming here. Oh. Apollo was a guest on our show where we talked about life in Vegas, and he talked about what it was like to be an African-American visiting India and spending time dealing with the police and all of that. So that was a fascinating story. Well, what is the Nevada story on this? Do you have much insight into?
Well, I do, because
of course, you were saying you went there for the show.
Yeah, well, yeah, there was that, but as it turns out, you'll find out in the book that Beth, who is who is this protagonist who you follow, who actually builds a multi-state operation, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have her in the book. This is amazing that she had the foresight to realize that she needed to expand beyond Arizona. So there's a whole chapter in the book about what it was like to apply in Nevada, and how competitive it was, and the kinds of folks she had to go up against, and the politicians that she had to charm, and the allies that she met, and some of the people that didn't like her so much, and how she had to kind of deal with all that, and also being one of the very, very few women who was operating at that level. So there's a lot in there. There's actually a whole chapter about Las Vegas in particular.
All right, let's see here. Sean says, on the plus side, Heather, is more people have more time to read your book. And Sean was a terrific guest on a show we did about the 30th anniversary of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I learned so much talking to her. She's a beauty blogger and an advocate for people with disabilities. And I learned so much from that episode, which was just a couple of weeks ago. Jonathan Borstein says the Strand is only a block away, except during a pandemic, which is, of course, true for.
Well, you can join us online. He can join us online.
Oh, tell us how we can find out about the event you're doing with the Strand online.
Well, I've been posting about it on social media, but I think if you just go to the Strand website, it's on there, and you can register. It's free. It's at 7:00 on Thursday.
So good.
This Thursday.
Vegas is the marijuana dispensary capital, and they scan your government ID. I bet that'll come up in a security clearance interview down the road. Let's see here. Heather is such a good interview.
Oh, Allison.
Allison and I have talked about having her on our show, and we've just had to plan that. And she says, you're such a good interview. Glad you're having her on the show. My mom, who of course remembers you from our time in grad school together. She's watching in Carolina. Hi, Emma. Love you. Great to see you. This is one of the things about when you have a good Indian audience. Look at this. People say, "Respected sir, you are doing a good job." Americans will not say things like this. So thank you, Lal, for watching.
And there's an Indian part of the book. You're
Is
not
that
going
right?
to believe it. There
Okay.
is, yes.
Okay.
Yes, Snoop Dogg. The beginning of Snoop Dogg's chapter is set in Mumbai.
Really? Okay.
His first visit to India, yes.
Okay, so we'll tell people about that. I'm sure Indian journalists in India will want to know about it. And Allison, this is a great interview. Interested in learning more. Hashtag PDP says hi, Heather. And Aparna is watching from Los Angeles, the American city that most feels like one big hot box. Yes to coming of age in the just say no 80s. And Aparna is a good friend. And let's see, Ashok is watching from Kerala. Aparna says cannabis equity is huge here in California.
Yeah.
And Mark is saying hello from Durham, North Carolina. What is, and I think of the Carolinas as the home of big tobacco. What is the approach? You said some of them have invested. What has been the approach of big tobacco to this?
Well, they have made some investment in Canada. It's not really something I can speak to too much at the moment. It wasn't really something that I delve into in the book, except to say that I think that when we think about big tobacco and some of the problems that we encountered with it going for so long without oversight, without people really knowing how addictive nicotine is, I think that and what they were allowed to get away with, and ultimately how we as a country, had a reckoning around that, and now you see what's happened with smoking rates. I think that the issue here is that when you talk about something that is a substance that a lot of people could potentially use, and certainly is something that needs to be regulated. I just think that it needs to have careful consideration. That really was the point I was making. And I was actually talking to someone earlier today about this, that with legalization, it's not just this idea of like, oh, we just flip a switch and like, okay, now it's legal. It's, if you look at what's happening in these states, it is highly regulated. They put so much thought into things like, tracking and tracing, literally from like seed, they call it from seed to sale. And there's software now that really tracks literally like the product, like where it came from, which exact plant it came from, and, in whichever cultivation facility, and they're tagged. And, I just, there's so much that I think the general public doesn't understand in terms of what has to happen in terms of safety. And then there's just so much education on the part of the public. This is so new that I think it's so important. It's really incumbent on government to start to get a handle on all of this, and to look to what's happened in these states, the ones that have actually legalized for adult use, what they've gone through to figure out how to keep the public safe. It's really it is fascinating. You see a lot of that is passed on to the businesses in terms of what they have to spend on compliance, and that's but then you understand that they have to, in order to reassure the public that what they're selling is safe and is labeled properly and is child proof, and we all read about the mistakes that happened in Colorado in the early years. And so I think to their credit, I think in these state legal markets, government and industry have really worked together to make sure that they are addressing these issues, so that there aren't major public safety issues. But there's a lot that still needs to be addressed, and I think that's what also makes it an interesting topic. And I wanted to make sure that people, when in terms of reading the book, I wanted them to come away with an understanding of how nuanced and how complex all of these issues are. And so that they could make up their own mind about all of it, but to understand that there's a complexity here. It's not just about like, oh, let's go out and party and get stoned. And I think when I first told people that I was working on this book, that's kind of what they thought it was going to be about. And everyone would look at me like, oh, that's the topic, but they didn't understand. I was real, I'm a wonk. I mean, I was really interested in the policy. I really was interested in, how do you set all of this up and keep people safe, and just all of that stuff. And I just, the politics of it. And so there's a lot there. It's actually very, very rich material.
Aparna says the state and cities of LA and Oakland, among others, are trying to subsidize, uplift cannabis entrepreneurs who are residents of zones that were ravaged by the war on drugs. And so
yes,
trying to,
they're leading the country.
Yeah, a lot of men were put away, African-American men were put away for so many years in very tragic circumstances. I did want to read to you a couple of questions that came to me from a friend who was not very pleased that I was bringing you on the show without having a counter voice. And so here are a couple of the questions. Doesn't writing a book with the title The New Chardonnay glamorize the use of an addictive drug? 1 in 6 people who start using the drug before the age of 18 can become addicted, is what a government site says.
Well, I think I'm not glamorizing it. If you read the book, the reason why I called it The New Chardonnay is I'm writing about the rebranding of cannabis. And that was how the industry really thought of it. And one of the themes of the book is looking at this idea of the Chardonnay moms and the marketing and the idea behind the marketing to reach this new audience. And some of the the hypotheses around that, and then ultimately what happened over the 8 years that I follow the industry. So there's that aspect of calling it the new Chardonnay. There's also the fact that in Colorado, that is actually how Amendment 64 was passed. The campaign was the campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol. And I thought that was really interesting, that was how these activists tried to make this argument to the public. By essentially what you'll read in the book, what they did was they tried to show, they tried to argue that in some ways that cannabis is safer to society than alcohol. That was the argument that they made, and they convinced voters of it. And I thought that was really compelling. And then there's the other aspect that I mentioned earlier about the quest to create new forms of cannabis. And a lot of the hype around beverages and a competition to alcohol consumption. And I thought that was interesting. So there's like a lot of parallels. But I think the biggest thing for me was, again, as this, suburban mom, and not a consumer of cannabis, I just thought it was interesting that all these people thought that they were going to be trying to market it to this audience of women, and what's ultimately happened is, if you look at the sales trends now, women are really the fastest growing segment of consumers in cannabis, as well as baby boomers. And so that was kind of interesting. So I'm really not making a case that it is the new Chardonnay. I'm using that as sort of a jumping off point, I think, to make people think about what's happening in the industry and how it's being marketed and how it's being rebranded, as opposed to saying that, it is the new Chardonnay.
When people who have young children are worried about trying to teach them about the dangers of marijuana, all this legalization and the positive image of marijuana makes it more difficult. What are your suggestions for teachers, for parents who want to be able to convince their kids to stay away?
Well, I think first of all, it depends on where you live. And I think one of the things that we've seen in states where it is legal is that and this is actually interesting. In Colorado, they did not see they didn't see an increase in teens using cannabis after legalization. What they have seen, and this is what I would say to parents, and this is why I think it's important to understand that it's not just about smoking weed, it's about all of these different ways that you can consume. What they did see recently, as of last week, there was a new report that came out from the state showing an alarming increase in the number of teens that are doing something called dabbing, which I was not familiar with before, but it's basically using there's a part of the cannabis plant called the trichome, which is where the psychoactive chemicals reside, and the oils can be extracted from that. And that's what these companies use to make the cartridges for vapes. It's what they use to make candies. But they also use it they can create a kind of almost like a waxy kind of product known as a concentrate, but has other kind of names shatter or resin or rosin, and it can be smoked on something called a dab rig, which is essentially like a a ceramic thing that you heat and then you inhale the vapor from it, and highly, highly, highly potent. I mean, it can be upwards of, over 60 to 70% pure THC. And what they saw in Colorado recently is that when they surveyed teenagers, that particular way of consuming cannabis was actually on the rise. And so when you talk about, oftentimes you hear people talking about the potency today and how the marijuana today is so much more potent. It's not just that the actual plants are bred to have a lot of THC in them. It's also these manufacturing techniques and the derivatives that are made to have very, very high concentrations. And so that's something I would very much be concerned about. And it's something that can be consumed without, it doesn't have necessarily the telltale smell that we all remember. So I think that's important. I think the way I talk about it with my kids, frankly, is it's just like alcohol. I don't want them, they shouldn't be putting anything in their bodies while their brains are still developing that could potentially stunt their, take away IQ points or stunt their development. I really talk about it with them as this is something for adults, unless a doctor is prescribing it for a particular condition. And it needs to be, it really needs to be regarded as something that is something that has to be, you have to have a lot of care and thought before you would ever use something like that. I mean, I don't want my kids drinking. I don't want them using cannabis. And they say, your brain is still developing until you're in your mid-20s. I don't know if I can prevent them from, 25, 26, but if I can get them to, hopefully not using before, they're out of college, that would be a real victory. And it's hard, the kids are just like dealing with what we dealt with. I feel like growing up for me, it was more about drinking. But I think it's just really having open conversations with your kids and letting them understand that, that they're under a lot of pressure and that they can talk to you about it and being honest with them about what the real risks are. And we talk a lot about impaired driving too. I mean, I live in the burbs, so we talk about that and they know. And the other thing I would say is, the last thing is I've really had some amazing conversations with them about the racial justice aspect of this whole topic. And they have really been, it's just really resonated with them. I mean, they were kind of embarrassed that I was even working on this topic at all. They were like, don't tell anyone what you're working on. But then once we started talking about the racial injustices of the drug war and certainly now, as we've all watched with these Black Lives Matter protests this summer after the death of George Floyd, I mean, they really feel energized and they want to understand and they want to change things in the future. And so the fact that I could have a conversation with them about something I was working on and how it related to what was actually happening right now was really cool. And I think it really inspired them.
Thank you. Wow, the hour has already flown by. I hope you can stick around for
me, Sree, I could keep talking.
Patty says hi from New York. Venkatesh says hello. How do you see the roles of parents and teachers in stopping racism? And one should stop the analogy of black is evil and white is good, as kids can't distinguish the reality. So this is slightly off topic, but of course we care a lot about racial justice. And how did you teach your kids? In the South Asian community, you have half South Asian kids. There is a lot of colorism and other problems to begin with, and also lack of knowledge of the history of this country and racial justice. So how did you teach your kids to be, to fight for a fairer and more just world?
Well, I think it's just always been a part of, first of all, I think the fact that they have two parents who are journalists and who came out of, a career that we both really went to because we appreciate what it means to speak truth to power and to hold people accountable and to question. I think that's just always been a part of like our dinner table discussions. And of course, the faith communities that we're a part of, both our synagogue and our, and our relatives who are observant in the Hindu community. I mean, I think, the concept of tikkun olam, or heal the world, it's just a big part of like our family. And so it wasn't a conversation that we started now. It's a conversation we've been having with them since they were toddlers. I do think that I think making them aware of their privilege, I think is really important. I think they are aware of their privilege, but I think pointing that out, and certainly this summer we were very fortunate to be able to go to a protest that was organized in our town by a number of high school students and recent grads of our high school, which really put quite a lens on some of the structural racism that was existing in the community that I don't think that we all had been as conscious of. And I think it was amazing to do that with them, and to get caught up in that, and to see how the community is starting to address it. I just recently joined the diversity task force for our school district. So I think a lot of it is talking about it with them, but it's also modeling and being involved and talking to them about the things that we think are important. Like I mentioned, my last book was very much about it was about gender equity, but it was also about diversity and inclusion in Silicon Valley. And that was something that we try to include them in the work that we do. And so I think that's just kind of part of our family. That's kind of a long answer, but I just think there's a lot of examples all the time. I think reading the newspaper with your kids, or watching 60 Minutes on Sunday. I mean, there's so many different ways to connect with them and help them make connections to their world, and help them form their own opinions about how to make change.
My kids watched 60 Minutes since they were too young to understand, because we always had it on Sundays, and we watch it in 44 minutes by speeding through it and occasionally skipping a story. But they are big 60 Minutes fans, and that has helped them see the world in ways that others may not have seen. Daniel says there are African-American men going to jail for decades for simple marijuana possession. Biden's failure on this issue is unforgivable. We talked a little bit earlier about that. I don't know if there is much more to say. Patty says it is similar to church and state except for banking. And Jigger says watching from the green state of California. And Mark says my first and only experience with cannabis was with brownies that I didn't know had hashish. And Mark says a lot of people forget that the Constitution was written on hemp, which is tied to the industry as well. Is that true? I didn't know that. I guess the paper he's talking about was made of hemp.
I think he's talking about the paper, but I think he's also referencing the hemp industry, which is also a whole other. I get into it in the book a little bit.
Okay, so we'll just have people read the book. Mark
read the
has been a guest on this show. He will talk to us about how to be allies of the African-American community. Mark says, do you think we will see cannabis advertisements in much the way we saw cigarettes with Marlboro Man at some point? Or I guess, will we skip that entirely and not have those ads at all?
Well, you see some of the billboard. I mean, you see some ads like if you live in California, or if you live in Vegas. I mean, and I'm thinking like in Denver too. I mean, you do see billboards. You see the ads. I don't know. I think it really depends on what happens federally. Right now, a lot of these brands, I mean, they can't advertise directly on social media, and they get policed a lot and they get shut down a lot. I don't know. I mean, I think it is a concern, because I do think that these products, as they try to appeal to, affluent, luxury kind of audience. I mean, yes, they are glamorized. They are in those markets. They definitely are. There's a certain lifestyle. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting. I think the onus is on us, right? To be a filter for our kids about that. I think it's really important that we have those conversations with them.
So can we do lightning round of questions and answers? So one question is, why is it that the federal government took a hands-off approach? If it is illegal, why are they allowed to operate? There are other industries that just because it's federally legal, I can't just go start something. So how is that possible that they let it go?
Well, I mean, there's a really long answer to that question. It depends on the administration. Like various administrations in recent years have tried to address this in different ways. So for example, during the Obama administration, there was something that was called the Ogden Memo that, came out that essentially allowed medical cannabis businesses to operate without fear of federal prosecutors going after them. And then, there were a series of other things that came after that, the Cole Memo, which then, also sort of instructed U.S. attorneys to focus their efforts on cartels and rather than these businesses that were operating legal under state law. But then you had Jeff Sessions who came in and he rolled back the Cole Memo and, under Trump and said, well, no. And so it has gone back and forth. I think the states have just continued to move ahead. But, there are always pockets where there's conflict. And what people tell me is like, it's either going to get to a point where like all 50 states just do their own thing and then sort of de facto it's legalized, or at some point the federal government will do something, will deschedule it. I mean, this also gets into questions, not only we talked about banking, but also gets into questions around research and federally funded scientific research. And there are a lot of people that, are, and rightfully so, are frustrated because they feel that all of the clinical research on the efficacy of the plant is happening in other parts of the world, but it's not happening here. And so if the federal government acts, then at some point that would open up so much more scientific investigation, because I think everyone does agree there are, therapeutic applications of cannabis, but we don't know all of them yet. And they have not been clinically studied, certainly in this country, in depth. And there could be so much more, but we don't. And most people don't even realize, like, the cannabis, like THC and CBD are only 2 of the hundreds of compounds in the plant. And, but we don't know that much about them yet. And so I think, at some point, I think people are hoping that we'll be able to see more of that research here at home that'll be funded by the government.
All right, so we're going to the lightning round now. Quick questions and quick answers.
Sorry. Quick answers. Sorry, long answer. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Okay. I'm just worried that this is late for you.
I forgot. It is getting late.
It's 12 past 10. The Connecticut chapter of the Society of Addiction Medicine and the Connecticut Psychiatry Society urged caution. At this time, there's insufficient evidence regarding the safety of marijuana for us within the medical community to fully back legalization of recreational, they said. So what is your response to that? That's one of the comments that's been shared here.
Well, like I said, I'm not an evangelist. I'm not an evangelist for this. I'm a journalist, and my role was really just to kind of expose and look under the hood of the industry. And I agree that I think that there are a lot of questions that still have to be answered. But I'm not taking a position on whether or not, it's not my job to take a position one way or the other. I really just wanted to shed light on the industry.
Mark is saying that he had a couple of my guests on his show, including Mitchell Silver, the New York City Parks Commissioner, which is that's awesome. Stefan says, absolutely fascinating discussion, Heather. I still remember the days of the May Day is J Day parades in Manhattan. It always ended up in Washington Square. Amazing what's developed years later with the industry. Yeah. And Apollo says nicotine is the most addictive, even more than heroin. And Mark says, I was just curious as far to see how far advertising will go. Thanks, Heather, for clarifying all the back end details, says Patty. And Vijay says, great vibes, thank you. Don't you think the legalized adult use may affect children and upcoming generation as their elders set up as a wrong? So the question is, what do you think it's going to, if you look forward 2 generations, what is going to happen? Is this going to be just like alcohol and treated the same way if you had to make a prediction, or is there a chance it can be rolled back?
Well, I just think that it's unlike alcohol. Like, I just think that that question also doesn't address all of the medical and wellness applications. And that's actually where we're seeing a lot of the growth. I mean, yes, there is there's the part of it that has to do with, the relaxing and unwinding and all of that. But then there's this whole other aspect of the industry that is really just beginning, which is around the therapeutic application. So I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. There are some people that say, well, if it's really is medicine, that it should be regulated by the FDA, and that's the way it should go. I don't know. I think it'll be I think we're really only in the first inning of all of this, to be quite honest.
Aparna says, I had no idea that's how legalization came up in Colorado. Did Heather see her own peers, suburban moms, change their views or consumption?
Well, I think they were curious. I think that was the main thing. I don't think it was so much people had a point of view of like, oh, this is bad or oh, this is good. It was more they just didn't know about it. And so I think they learned a lot. I shared a lot of my adventures with them and all the things I was learning along the way. Like I said, I think there's a lot of education that still really needs to happen on the part of the public.
Thank you. You're keeping your answer short. Rose says, does Heather have children who are teens? And the answer is yes. And therefore, how has it been to have a mom who's researching this? Are there a lot of jokes around this? And how do you convince them that this is bad? You talked about that a little bit already, but for anyone who missed that part, anything you want to just quickly say?
I just was saying before that they actually were really embarrassed that I was working on this. They didn't want anyone to know. They were really, really embarrassed about it. But then once I started talking with them about the science and the social justice aspects of the story, and also some of the medical aspects of the story too, and talking to them about how it had been legalized for medical purposes and why and who was using it and that kind of stuff, they thought that was really interesting. But again, they know that when we talk about it for recreational purposes, that it is for adults.
A filmmaker friend of mine, Jeff Eichen, wrote a movie about how many people are serving time for possession. He actually has gotten folks out. A follow-up question from Aparna, since you've already answered my other, did you get into exploring it yourself where legal?
I really didn't. And the reason why is, first of all, I really wanted to maintain I mentioned earlier that I had to travel a lot to report this story. And so when I was spending time with the various characters as a fly on the wall, I really had to have my wits about me. Like I was working. So it wasn't like I was I needed to be really clear-headed. And yeah, I mean, it just, I really didn't.
Rose says dabbing can be smoked and be highly potent. She's quoting you, and she says the waxes and oils can have 95% THC potency. Kids are doing this.
Yes, they are.
Venkatesh says, do they have medical characteristics in some positive way? If so, what purpose? I know it's a long question, but if you could keep that tight answer on that.
Well, I'll just say that one thing that I thought was really interesting, and I explain it very briefly in the book, is that our bodies have something called the endocannabinoid system, which actually mirrors the same compounds that are actually found in the cannabis plant. And so this is being studied still, but that's where some of the initial thoughts about, how cannabis interacts with different systems in our bodies. And so you hear people anecdotally talking about, using various parts of the plant to relieve pain or to relieve inflammation or spasticity, in patients that have MS. So, there is study around this and some clinical research. And certainly, I should say that the FDA did approve the very first pharmaceutical that is cannabis derived called Epidiolex in the summer of 2018, which is a medication to treat a very rare seizure disorder in children. So the FDA has actually approved a drug that you can get a prescription from your regular doctor for. And I think that was a real moment that lent legitimacy to the medical movement, for sure, to have an actual pharmaceutical approved and being sold in the U.S. for a very serious medical condition.
Apollo says, I agree, your brain needs to be developed before introducing things like alcohol, etc. But America got started selling tobacco. That was how a lot of the original trade was. We have too many comments to get into here. We're just keep going. Ajay says this is important. and so many more comments. I'm just going through
Oh
here.
my gosh.
Let's see. Ankit says this is used mostly by marijuana by the youth. And Paula says you should see the diversity of people shopping in the dispensaries, pretty eye-popping. And Venkatesh says learned a lot. So that's great. So with that, we should let you give us a couple of final thoughts, and then I'll just show people your website once again so that they can go to heathercabot.com. You're also on Twitter as Cabot Ventures, and you can find her schedule and her podcast, writing, media kit. Everything is here at heathercabot.com. So I'll pull that up there. Go ahead.
Oh, I would just say thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to kick off the book launch, because it happens in just less than 2 hours. It'll be publication day, and that's exciting. And it's been 3 years in the making. So this is very auspicious that I'm getting a chance to talk to my old friend, Sree, who's known me for a really long time. No, I really hope that you guys will. I hope that you'll pick up the book. And like I said, it's really, I don't take a position on legalization, and I really hope people will, figure out their own point of view after reading the book. It really tries to take you inside this world that I really didn't know existed, and to introduce you to some of these really unforgettable characters and their journeys to cash in on cannabis. And and hopefully, like I said, it'll just be a great escape from all of the other news that we're dealing with right now, but also touching on on a number of very timely topics as well. So enjoy.
And this is one of ABC's must reads for August, and so that's a big reading month. So we hope people will take up the book and learn from Heather Cabot. She's the author of The New Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream. And it says here, The New Chardonnay tells the unbelievable story of pot's astonishing rebranding, pulling back the curtain to show how a drug that was once the subject of just say no warnings managed to shed its unsavory image and land at the center of a booming and surprisingly upstanding industry. So we'll learn more about it. I encourage everybody to pick up the book and learn more. And thank you, Heather, for being here. Wish you the very best on your book tour.
You.
I know you're doing a lot of virtual stuff, and anybody who wants to find you and be in contact, they can go to heathercabot.com and follow you on Twitter, Cabot Ventures. I am so honored that we are meeting a couple of hours before launch day. Wish you the very best to you and the family. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and to your family as well. Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Thanks. That was Heather Cabot, and many, many thanks to her for being here. If you have suggestions for speakers, please let us know. I want to tell you what's coming up in the days ahead. Tomorrow on Tuesday night, we have a big celebration of spelling bees. We have former champions of the National Spelling Bee that was canceled this year, but we'll be talking about the South Asian Spelling Bee, as well as the big documentary on Netflix that many of you have seen about the spelling bee. We will have the director of that movie here as well. We will learn a lot together about the spelling bee industry in America. So that's on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Gail Simmons, the well-known cookbook author, and the judge on Top Chef will be here, which will be a very exciting show. We'll talk about the food industry and all the things that how COVID is affecting the food business. And then on Thursday, we will be talking to Parag Khanna, who was named by Esquire magazine as one of the 75 most influential people for the 21st century. That's going to be an outstanding show at 9 p.m. These are all 9 p.m. Eastern times just this week. Episode number 152 is over. I am so grateful to all of you for being here. Please be in touch. Please tell us what we should be working on. We're live every single day. We're learning so much together. We want to, before we go, do what came out of my conversation with Kimberly Crenshaw, the professor who coined the term intersectionality. We asked her, what can we do to be allies? And she said, say their names. And so that's what we're going to do right now. We use this photograph on the left, you see, of a cover of Time magazine by Titus Kaffer, incredibly moving picture on the left, and on the right, a photo of a young Larcinia Floyd with her son, George Floyd, She would die 2 years to the day almost to the day that he would be killed in Minneapolis. They're now buried together in Houston, and we are now going to say those names. These are the names on the cover, on the border of that Time magazine cover. Trayvon Martin, Yvette Smith, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Jerame Reed, Natasha McKenna, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray. I'm going to pause there to tell you that you've heard of some of these names, like Tamir Rice and Freddie Gray. But what about all these other names? Do you know them? Do you know their stories? William Chapman, Sandra Bland, Darius Stewart, Samuel Dubose, Janet Wilson, Kaylin Rockmore, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Joseph Mann, Terrence Crutcher, Chad Robertson, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey, Stefan Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Antoine Rose, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. That is, of course, not every name, but those are the names on the cover of Time magazine, and we wanted to read them to you today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a supporter of this show. So many of you write in to tell us that this show is uplifting, that this helps you in the middle of the pandemic. I have to tell you, it helps me more than it helps anyone else. We want to thank our sponsors for making this possible, and our sponsors include our friends at Muckrack Academy, Fundamentals of Social Media, free certification now available, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social, and also our friends at She's on Call, an incredible show that airs on Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Yesterday's show is still evergreen as surgeons Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian discuss medical issues and what's happening with COVID. This time they talked to a psychologist, Dr. Judith Chusid, and Carmen Simmons, a fourth-year medical student. I learned so much from this show and hope you will watch. We also want to thank our sponsors, Nunbelievable, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each handcrafted cookie provides a meal to those in need. One cookie equals one meal. 20% off with the code SREE. 20% off Nunbelievable, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Please check them out. And we want to say that promotional consideration is also brought to you by
Start Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbuster streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
Rave reviews for the caper comedy Loot Case, now streaming on Hotstar. Use the code SREE2020 to get a $3.75 month subscription to hotstar.com/US. Hotstar.com/US. The code is SREE2020. Why not give it a try? And we want to tell you about a course, a workshop that I'm hosting next Wednesday, August 19th, not this week. Nonprofits and Social Media, How to Cope When the World is on Fire. Beatrice Frey, Head of Digital Communications at UN Peacekeeping. Tick Milan, the former media strategist of GLAAD. And Dante Lacona, the Senior Social Media Officer at the IFRC, the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, and former social media officer at the World Health Organization, will all be here to give you tips. You can buy a ticket at bit.ly/NP Workshop 2020. Take a screenshot, take a photo, send this to your friends. The tickets are just $20 to $30. And if you can't afford that, let me know. We'll help you get right into this show and learn from our guests. So thank you very much, everybody. Please email me. You can see my email address right there. If you have ideas on how we can collaborate, what we can work on, and we're looking for guests, we're looking for story ideas, theme ideas, and sponsor ideas, send them all to us. We're grateful to have them, and we will see you soon. The show was, I learned so much from Heather Cabot. In fact, there are comments still coming in. Let's see. Ankit says, good vibes. Apollo says, I'll purchase your books. Aparna says, happy pub day. Vandana puts in a link to heathercabot.com. Venkatesh says, all the best. Patty asks, did Heather have a mentor for this book? So maybe she can answer some of these questions on Facebook. Nikhil says, amazing how this industry has changed. Thanks, says Nikhil. And Apollo says, congratulations, Heather. And lots of comments and things coming in here. So with that, I'll say goodnight. Thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.